Greetings, everyone. I'm Minky Worden from Human Rights Watch, and welcome everyone to our live video on the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics that launched this Friday in China in an unprecedented climate of abuse and human rights violations. So I'm going to give a short introduction, and then I'm going to welcome our very special guest today, Badiucao, who is a Chinese-Australian artist, a human rights activist, and one of the great creators of amazing activist art around the Beijing Olympics. A little bit about our work at Human Rights Watch. I oversee all of our work on sport and human rights worldwide. I also edited a book on the Beijing Olympics in 2008, and I previously lived and worked in Hong Kong. And I wanted to say, if you have a question, please put it in the chat. So just a quick introduction to our topic tonight. For the last 30 years, Human Rights Watch has reported on deepening repression in China, including before, during, and after the Beijing Olympic Games in 2008. Those were the Summer Olympics. Welcome, Badiucao. Nice to see
Hi.
you. Hello.
It's great to be here. Hello.
Good to have you. And on February 4, which is just in 2 days, the Beijing Winter Olympics will launch in China against a backdrop of Chinese government crimes against humanity, targeting of Uyghur Muslims, repression in Hong Kong and Tibet, and risks to athletes unprecedented in the modern Olympic era. These are Olympic Games that are designed to sports wash the crimes I have just described. And in one of Human Rights Watch's most innovative creative campaigns, we've been so proud to partner with Badiucao, who is a human rights activist himself, but also someone who has a unique ability to put into art very difficult human rights concepts. And I wanted to begin our conversation by actually showing one of the videos and the animations that Badiucao has created for and with Human Rights Watch. And really, this is a way that we're attempting to change the narrative around the Beijing Olympics and remind viewers of the Olympics, or people who love sport, that there is no successful Olympics when you have human rights violations, crimes against humanity, and so many political prisoners. So with that introduction, I'm going to go ahead and show the first video. Can you tell us a little bit about what this signified for you? How did you go about thinking of this artistic concept, and also just as a Chinese person, how do you feel about these games opening on Friday? 3 questions in one.
Sure. Thank you. Very glad to be here. Well, for this video, I think the concept is really, really clear. That we want to see, well, Beijing and China, the Chinese government, was giving 2 opportunities to have the Olympics. One in 2008, one in this year. Obviously, we're expecting the Chinese government will improve itself in this long time, and especially because when the world is giving opportunity and embrace China in 2008, it is based on the promise from the Chinese government saying they will make China a much open society. They will respect the human rights. And that is the foundation. And that I think that's a foundation for any of us would want a country to host Olympic, which is respecting the universal human rights. However, so many years passed away. The situation did not just remain the same, but it's getting worse. And so within this video, in the first section, you see one police is beating on one protesters, human rights defenders. And in the second part of the video, you actually see more police are doing this brutality, inflicting pain to the ordinary people. And to me, it's really a huge disappointment because now I left China. I have to exile from China because my family and myself constantly being threatened to harassment by the Chinese government. But in 2008, I was still just a college student, a law school student in China. And by the time, I think the atmosphere is a little bit different. People genuinely believing that maybe this is the chance that we Chinese in this land will having a bright new future. However, all those hope has vanished under this oppression of the Chinese government. So I think it's very important that we highlight and for so many years, this government never changed. And so our reaction to this government must change, must be more must be more firm, must be more sought for, and not just thinking about it, but also doing more action.
I saw a question from one of our viewers asking, can we say in plain language, what are the human rights abuses that we're talking about? And that's just to say, we're talking about a lack of press freedom. There's no freedom to protest. There's no right to free speech. Women have trouble accessing basic human rights. There are many political prisoners. Some of the country's greatest constitutional scholars, lawyers, activists, health rights activists, citizen journalists are in prison for trying to tell the truth about human rights abuses. And I think some of perhaps the worst crimes between 2015, when China won the right to host the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, for a second time, is crimes against humanity in Xinjiang, which is an area that has Uyghurs and Turkic Muslims. And this is mass incarceration, putting as a million people in prison. It is torture. It is forced labor. All of these things ought to be completely antithetical to hosting the Olympics. Another one of the animations actually shows the role of the International Olympic Committee. And the International Olympic Committee is the body that is tasked with hosting these games. It brought the Olympics to China in 2008, and it brought the Olympics back to China in 2022. Can you talk to me about the animation that shows it shows the role of the international community starting at the top of the role of the IOC starting at the top of a ski slope? How did you think of that? Were you inspired by winter sports to say something about the IOC?
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept of creating this body of video is based on engage with real Winter Olympic sports and try to kind of spin a humor and satire within the existing form of those sports. So, this is the skiing that when athletes will try to avoiding flags on the ground, it will be a perfect metaphor to showing how IOC is avoiding, all the human rights issues on the way to their victory. But in fact, what they are, avoiding is actually the very essence of the humanity that we should celebrate within the Olympics. We see IOC as an international organization. We expect it to using Olympic not just as a way to making money or making political propaganda, but also more importantly, it is something that highlighting our humanity. And that has everything to do with aligning with human rights. However, IOC has failed this mission so many times and so badly. Well, I cannot remember a single time that IOC is directly tackled down on China's human rights abuse, not once. And in fact, they are actively play along with the Chinese government. And recently we see there's a tennis player whose name is Peng Shuai. It's a female tennis player, and he openly accused one of China's high official on sexual harassment and manipulation and even rape. And then she disappeared, and everybody is asking about it. A lot of top female tennis players are tweeting and sending Instagram information to ask where is Peng Shuai. And then IOC coming out and did a Skype with Peng Shuai, but apparently this communication is not really in a safe or a free will situation. So IOC is actively collaborating with the Chinese government on this very terrible case. Instead of helping and supporting these female athletes, what they're doing is actually persecuting her and putting her in this very dangerous situation together with Beijing. None of this is really acceptable. I think it's really a shame that actually IOC behave in this manner.
Yeah. One of the words that Human Rights Watch uses to describe this is sports washing. And one of your videos does your animation does a very graphic way of describing this. It's, to me, it uses another sports metaphor, but that has a double meaning. And it's the image of skaters going over ice. And right. you see behind them, you see the sponsors, Coca-Cola, Atos, Visa, Procter and Gamble, all of these household names, these companies that are trusted companies. And then you see the skater skating over this word, and the animation pulls back, and you can see that it's skating over and cutting up human rights. And it's such a striking image. Once you see it, it's very impossible to forget it. Can you tell me about, is the message on that about the sponsors who are the ones, the Olympics is a multi-billion-dollar business. It's paid for by these sponsors, these companies, and these companies all have human rights policies. But are these companies speaking out about human rights abuses in China? Are they, in your view, do they fulfill their responsibilities as good corporate citizens if they are underwriting these Olympics in such a terrible human rights environment? They
definitely fail this job. Apparently now the modern Olympics is really a game about capital and money instead of really showing the humanity of athletes and cheering them. So those companies knowing what happened in China, those companies knowing that IOC is collaborating with the Chinese government, but they choose to be silent and they choose to keep sponsoring without making any comment on China's human rights code. I think it is really hypocritical because the brand that you just mentioned, a lot of them actually have human rights writing into their regulations. In their brand building, they will celebrate in saying they respect and defending human rights. But when it's really about big market like China, they choose to be silent, choose to actually collaborating with those problematic systems. I think it's really a short eyesight way for those companies to doing so, even though they may make short-term economic profit, but in the long term, obviously it is a damage to the brand. And we as customers and as ordinary people, that actually we have the power to signal this to those companies in various campaigns in form of boycott or protest, so that those companies one day they must realize there is a price to be aligned with human rights abuser, and in this way the company's brand will be damaged as well if they continue to doing so. There is a risk to collaborating with a genocide Olympic, and we are ordinary people. It is responsible to showing that what the prize would be look like.
Yeah. So, fans of sports events are sometimes known by another word, humans or consumers. So, everyone, the estimated millions of people who will watch these Olympics, do you think they have any responsibility to speak out? Do you want them to share these animations that you've created to say that they are concerned about their beloved sport being used to sports wash terrible human rights abuses?
Well, definitely. I think, when we're watching sports, it's not just for entertaining, because we're truly seeing the best character reflecting as human being, as an entire race within those excellent performance. We're not just sitting there watching a circus. It's very important that audience are having the platform and a voice to talking about those very important issues. And that's how we protect the sports. That's how we really respect the sports that we love. It's definitely our duty.
Speaking of athletes, one of the first of the animations that Human Rights Watch released together with you that has such another indelible image. This animation has a downhill skier an Olympian preparing for her big moment on the world stage at the Olympics, and she puts on her boots, she puts on her gloves, she puts on her helmet and her goggles, and then finally reaches into the air and gets a piece of red tape and covers her mouth with it. And this is meant to illustrate what athletes and Olympians, tens of thousands of them who will be in Beijing competing for the next few weeks, have had to do. They have had to bring burner phones to scrub their social media accounts of any messages about human rights. They have worries about whether they'll be able to contact family members safely and securely, whether the contents of their phone will be downloaded and used by the Chinese government. Do you feel like athletes are being treated well at this Olympics in China? Is this something that is normal or should be repeated?
It is definitely very, very concerning. And another way to say, like, if they have our video in their mobile phone, probably they will get into trouble in Beijing very fast. Athletes has been subject to this situation that they cannot speak freely. Their basic human rights has been stripped away even before the game began, and that's something that we sports lovers must care about it. And as I know, there are apps developed by the Chinese companies actually doing more of the damage to the athletes. There are very real concern of those apps will be putting on athletes' phone that is resulting. That's why that they have to bring a burner and not bring their own personal device. So what it achieves is actually, well, now they are taking away from access to their device. They're taking away from their voice to actually telling the true side of their experience in China. They're putting this surreal books, and even there can be a worse situation is that I'm afraid those athletes who went to China will not really see the true side of China. So in a way, they're putting this very delusional as well as hyper situation that you only see one side of the game and you wouldn't see the real side of China. So when they come back, when they're talking about those athletes, unconsciously they could become a part of China's propaganda. So again, they're being taken away the rights and they've been subject to be a tool for the Chinese government's propaganda. And those situations are quite unfortunate, and I do think this is very unfair to them.
Yeah. Throughout history, some of the great indelible moments have been athletes protesting. We think of John Carlos and Tommy Smith on the podium in Mexico City in 1968 with the Black Power salute, protesting racial injustice, and with buttons that read the Olympic Committee for Human Rights. And I think of that athletes are some of the great spokespeople for humanity, for human rights, for racial justice, for LGBT rights. And I think it's one of the tragedies of these games that they will not feel safe to speak out. And they're being told by Chinese officials that they cannot speak out or there will be punishment. And this is completely unprecedented in recent Olympics. It's terrible for athletes, and it denies them one of their fundamental human rights. So athletes should not just shut up and skate or ski. They have an absolute right to use their platform to speak out about human rights, or frankly anything they want to speak out about. For you about the fifth animation, and it begins with a Olympic torchbearer, and it has the athlete running with the flame. And maybe tell us what is illuminated in the flame. Is it, bearing in mind the Chinese government wants to host these Olympics to sports wash its terrible and deteriorating human rights situation. Do you think that's successful, that effort to sports wash? Is it working? And what were you attempting to say with this animation?
Well, I think the Chinese government is trying its best to create this smog to covering all its human rights abuse. But apparently the Olympic has putting China into the very scope of the entire world's attention. This can definitely go two ways. Well, the Chinese government could sell their propaganda and letting people to be fooled again, like in 2008. But our audience, ordinary people and countries who enjoy democracy and freedom could also using this opportunity to highlighting those issues in China. And it's not just a good for the people outside of China. In fact, it's helping my people, Chinese who are living in this land and suffering all those terrible crimes, like the torture that we see in that animation, like what happened to the Uyghur community, like what happened to the Tibetan community being oppressed and is stripped away from freedom of religion for so long. And all of those issues, that is very important topic that we can introduce to the general public during the Olympic game. And we have a choice to not follow the Chinese government's propaganda, but using this opportunity to discuss and talk about some real issues that will help all of us.
I saw a question from one of our viewers. Mei Feng was asking, what inspires you? What gives you hope in this, as these Olympics launch? It appears the Chinese government is getting away with its scheme to sports wash. What inspires you?
Well, I think nowadays we look at China, it's quite a scary experience because we see China is very different from 2008. It is the second largest economy, and the threat that it can project to the world is very different from 2008 as well. But the bright side is I see a very strong reaction, at least coming from some major countries around the world. There are diplomatic boycotting against this coming Olympics. There is a lot of media discussion on all those topics, human rights topics that we just mentioned. I see, artists like me joining this campaign and create a lot of work to talking about those issues. So all of this is giving me a sense of hope. Because yes, now the situation of human rights abuse is probably one of the worst points in its entire history. But on the other hand, we do see the whole world is waking up from the propaganda dream that created by the Chinese government. So we can, make a change based on this much clearer understanding of what the Chinese government is really trying to do.
I wanted to make sure that we also cover what inspired you originally to become an artist. And I know that I'm class of 1989. I know that the courage of students and workers and academics and others who gathered in Tiananmen Square in 1980 and June of 1989 is what inspired me to do human rights work. And I wanted to ask, I've heard you speak about the image of the tank man, which is one of the most indelible images of recent Chinese history in the last 30 years. And yet so many ordinary Chinese young people have never seen this and don't know what it means. Are you trying with your art to reach the youth of China and to share with them something like what happened to you? Would you mind to tell us how you found out about Tiananmen Square massacre and how that changed your life and brought you to art?
Yeah, sure. I think what happened in 1989 in Beijing is quite an extraordinary event from the aspects of this massive peaceful protest organized by Chinese citizens, students, and laborers. And the very tragedy in the end shocked the world. Actually, this fundamentally changed my life and understanding of China. But up to I never know the existence of Tiananmen Massacre or the entire movement until in my 20s. Can you imagine that? There's no teacher, not my relative, there's no publication, no TV ever mentioned about this extraordinary event and this terrible, terrible tragedy. And I actually, knowing the existence of Tiananmen Massacre only by an accident. In my university time, I was watching a film downloaded from the internet with my friends. And then suddenly that film became something else. So it turned out to be a documentary about Tiananmen Massacre. And all of us couldn't really move after watching that because we feel that we've never told this. We feel betrayed by the history, by this country. And that event is only happened not far away ago. Obviously, after that, I feel, now this China is really still the same China as at the beginning. It never really respecting human rights. It also try to change people's memory from the history and strip away our rights to knowing what really happened. So this society, for me, is lack of the ability to reflect its own problems. So in a way, it's also losing the mechanism to improve itself. Actually, now I have a Tankman tattoo on my arm as a permanent remind to me that what happened in the history, and I've been making a lot of art that's dedicated to this very movement and to this very image as well. I think it's very important that we keep revisiting this event and this image as long as the Chinese government is trying to cover it, just like what they did, what they're going to do within these Olympic Games to covering other human rights abuse as well.
Yeah, I think instead of higher, faster, stronger, the Olympic motto in China should be higher, faster, harsher, or maybe a great wall of repression.
Yeah.
We're incredibly grateful to you. Everyone at Human Rights Watch and all of our followers are incredibly grateful to you for putting into art what so many of us have struggled to put into words. And we are so glad that many people will get to see your art in the context of these Olympics. But we also, and we encourage people, actually, since you mentioned it, those documentaries are The Gate of Heavenly Peace, The Tank Man. It's available on the internet. I recommend that everyone should watch it. And, please, I recommend that everyone should follow Badiucao's work. Every day there is a new piece of art practically, and we're honored to partner with you to share the important message that there are no successful Olympics without human rights. So thank you for everything you do. And everyone, please watch the animations. It's available on the Human Rights Watch main account. And we also ask you to share them if you too think that the Olympics should not be about human rights abuses, but rather about celebrating humanity. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure. Bye.